Welcome back to the Big Rethink Interviews. I'm Bryan Alexander, I'm the interviewer, and I'm coming to you from Manassas, Virginia. And with me is a student from our LDT program. Madeline, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Madeline Olson. I'm an incoming student in the LDT program. I'm so happy to be here with you, Bryan and Adam, this morning. Thanks for joining and letting me join your conversation.
Madeline, nice to meet you.
Welcome, Madeline. And Adam, tell us what your current title is and where you're coming to us from.
Hey everybody, I'm Adam Bush. I'm the Provost and co-founder of College Unbound, based in Providence, Rhode Island. That's where I am. Sort of hunkered down with family in an old home on College Hill in Providence.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. College Hill is storied. Yeah. Well, welcome. We have a whole set of questions, and I want to just dive right into the first one. And the question is, when you look at the landscape of higher education, both with College Unbound as well as the whole sector, what are you seeing as the sector responds to two huge developments? One is the COVID-19 pandemic, and the other is the mass anti-racist mobilization.
Yeah. So you know this essay that Arundhati Roy wrote that was going around that like everyone was sharing at the start of the pandemic. It was like pandemic as portal. So how do we in this moment then think about the possibilities of reimagining? There's this other thing. Arundhati Roy's written so much that's beautiful and amazing. There's other quote that I look to a lot where she provocatively suggests, this is the quote, "There's no such thing as the voiceless. There's only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard." And I think that's what higher ed is grappling with. They've been deaf. We've been deaf to our own ideals. And so it's really in this moment now thinking about what does it mean to work in solidarity with communities that are marginalized and most challenged by racial, economic, and gender injustice around issues that impact them and us. And what does it mean to build institutions that don't further inscribe those injustices, but dismantle them. And I think too often in building institutions, you're inscribing the institution in that structure that it came to be. And institutionalizing that act, I think, repeats a lot of that harm. And so that's what I think I'm struggling with College Unbound. But I think higher ed as a sector also is trying to understand both in the moment of institutionalizing, of starting colleges, what were they built on and what have they kept up and maintained, and how can they, I think other institutions are thinking about how do they preserve their ability to exist while also unpacking a lot of those things that they were built on. And that's around going deeply into their histories. That's around who has access to those institutions. That's around who's in leadership positions in those institutions, who works at those institutions, and what those conditions are. And that's full-time faculty, that's part-time faculty, that's staff, maintenance staff, sort of at all levels. And so I use the language in the past of full participation, that the idea of everyone having the ability to, through higher education, be their full selves. And I think so often we fall short of that idea of full participation. I think that's what higher ed really is grappling right now. I mean, so much of the summer discussion, and this is from your writing too, Bryan, and so much energy was spent around this thing about like, are we coming back in person in the fall? And I just think about if all that energy was spent elsewhere, if higher education as a whole had accepted the fact that we shouldn't be going back in the fall as with business as usual, instead had used that energy and those resources to really think about, how do we best fulfill our missions? It's like being in person thing. Like it echoes a lot the conversation around access. It's like, how do we get butts in seats? And really this focus needs to be about what do we do once we're there together, even if that medium of what together is changes. even if we're together differently, really the thing is, what does it mean to study together? What does it mean to co-create? And what does it mean to examine the world and examine our places in it? A- a- that's what's so critical. It's what are you studying and how is it relevant to your lives in this moment and in the world you want to create? There's lots of other ways I can go off and answer the question more deeply. I think other questions you might ask will play into that. So I'll take a breath, but then return to some of these issues.
Well, definitely do take a breath, but we have, and thank you for that inspiring overview answer. Madeline had a question that I think builds on that pretty clearly. Madeline, do you want to offer that?
Yes, yeah, thank you for sharing all that, Adam. Especially, I really love how you talk about colleges' missions and thinking about that in terms of their accountability towards missions as we're thinking about that. In an interview with USC News a while ago, you explained your innovative approach towards having a commitment towards reorienting higher education with addressing equity and, yeah, opportunity for deeper systemic, more complex, and more transformative thinking. So specifically, what do you think should this reorientation look like in the current moment of social justice reformation, in which colleges must be thinking critically about the decisions they're making with equity, accessibility, inclusion, and what does that look like for College Unbound?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that you found an old article or interview. Um, so, I mean, right in higher ed, uh, there's schools that are seen as public institutions. There's schools that are seen as nonprofit private institutions. There's schools that are seen as for-profit institutions. And those are kind of like, I get it. I get the distinction. And those are kind of crap distinctions. Every school is a public institution and needs to act like that and act for the public good. And I think too often schools are acting for their own safety and security. And so I think there's a reframing of what does it mean to be a school that centers the public good. In that past answer, when I said, when I talked about full participation, that to me, when we wrote that idea in a paper in 2011, it was about joining together these separate conversations of diversity and inclusion over here and civic engagement over here. But really ask for a full reframing of higher ed and of an institution, where it needs to be this soup to nuts approach of how at each level of the school is a person able to be their full selves through that space. And always that answer is no right now. That the professor who's doing deep engagement and justice work is not normally allowed to or seen to have that work be critical to their tenure and promotion. That they more often than not are putting a huge amount of their time towards mentorship of younger scholars of color. That those scholars then are modeling certain behavior, that they are stopping, they're not bringing their full selves into the institution because they're trying to advance and do the paper and do the thing that gets promoted. So it's like these cycles end up repeating themselves, and instead you need to intervene in them. The College Unbound in some ways does that, and in some ways reinscribes some of those things. So I have a school built entirely on part-time faculty. I offer small stipends and honorarium for people going off and doing work, but too often it's like someone's teaching a class or two. I'm trying to work with USC's Adriana Kizar and the Julius Center to really think about what does a full model of an engaged part-time faculty look like, and how can they be fully committed to the institution of equity at the core of that relationship with faculty. With administration too, we, in this really, I think, sweet and awesome way, love hiring our alumni. I have 5 alums who work with College Unbound right now. And what does it mean to take seriously that commitment so that they have opportunities to grow in their jobs and step into leadership positions in the school, and not just be at entry level in like positions because that's a sweet first job when they finish their degree. And so how can they be and become and share their full selves in the institution and grow into those leadership spaces? I think we do it really well with students. And I'll talk a little bit about that. It's like our whole school is built around the idea that um, students come to us on their second, third, or fourth time at college because they're made to feel crappy at their past times at college. We're degree completion school, and so they're coming to us saying, "I that didn't work for me because they didn't see everything I am." So how do you build a college whose curriculum is asset based, that recognizes all the pieces of someone, that they're a parent, that they are juggling these jobs, that they're connected to their church and their community and doing all these projects, and instead of those being things that pull you away from your curriculum and the things that maybe count in a class? How is it the role of the school to recognize that learning in the world, to recognize that growth, and to allow a student to dictate where they want to go? That isn't about the accumulation of these classes to lead to a major, but this is the work I want to do in the world. How is the school in service of that goal? That's the switch we're trying to do. We talk about project-based learning in the college. It's not really project-based learning. It's whole student learning in some way. It's like I never want the student inventing a project for the sake of a class. I want always for the project, the work the student's doing, to have its own life. It's the role of the class, of the structure of the institution, of the faculty, to help that work grow into fruition and bear fruit, whether that lines up with an academic calendar or not. And so it pushes against those structures like an academic calendar. It means a project might not neatly wrap up December 13th because grades are due 2 days later. It's that the project and the work is happening as it's happening. And how can we provide toolkits and lenses and resources and faculty mentors and other skills and tools and communities for students to be able to tackle the work they want to do in the world? And that, to me, I think is a really important switch for undergraduate education for adult learners, but really for higher education as a whole. And that's what we're trying to do. And for me, that's an equity and asset-based approach to undergraduate education. Did that answer your question okay? I can do a little bit more too. I can keep rambling. I know you can also pull me down a little bit.
That was perfect. Thank you. I think Bryan has follow-up questions. Thank you, Adam.
That's fantastic. And we have a whole stack of questions. So and by we, I mean all of us. So we have the next one is if our first couple of questions were more qualitative, then this next question is a bit quantitative, which is thinking about this process of academic transformation. What metrics do you track, or what metrics should we track?
So I will answer your quantitative question rather qualitatively. We're a school that's in what we hope are the final stages of initial accreditation. And so we are gathering data a lot, and we're doing iPads for the, second time ever with us, and we're doing data first forms out the wazoo, and we have all these numbers flying around, and they're really important to tell the story about how we're thinking about educational effectiveness, institutional resources, the role and meaning of our curriculum, and of the larger peer supports and community work. And there's two other pieces I want to throw in there. I mean, one is a lot of our students are parents. And so I'm thinking about this notion of generational hope. How do you measure something that and I'm living right now with my in-laws and my stepkids. And so it's we're all on top of each other in this beautiful way. And so many of our students are on top of one another with their families, with shared responsibilities of being caregiver and caregiving in their jobs and in their homes. In this moment when we are in folks' homes differently, through Zoom, through webcams, through courses that are the student, that's where they're doing their learning and the documentation of that learning. How are we aware of that and aware of the impact that a parent doing college at the kitchen table has on the larger household? I'm really interested in that. Also, Rick Lowe, who's this amazing artist and activist in Houston in the Third Ward, and for a number of years has started and run something called Project Row Houses. Says the only standard for judging socially engaged art should be about how much justice it creates in the world. So he said that about his creative practice, but I think that that's something that we as an institution and as a sector have to keep in mind always. How do we measure the justice we're creating and supporting in the world? And that's maybe a mushy answer to your very solid question, but at the heart, that's what I want to always be grappling with.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate both of those answers, especially the intergenerational hope angle, the impact of higher education on multiple generations, and how much justice does this create in the world? Thank you. Well, if our picture was big before, we're now expanding it a little further, which is, we're talking about 2020. Where do you see all these changes headed for the next few years of higher education, either again within College Unbound or within the whole of higher education?
Yeah. So, I mean, we started College Unbound in a different form in 2009, but as College Unbound in 2009, and we were sort of the nut jobs saying higher ed wasn't working when clearly it wasn't working. I mean,
Right.
we were grappling with it was an 89%, it was an 11% graduation rate for first generation low income students. Like that was the number floating around. It was like, holy shit, like anyone can do better than that if you just try. And so that was what we were working in and with and against in 2009. So things have not been right for a long time, and they weren't right long before that, and they certainly aren't right now. And so when we're talking about like changes of this moment and changes tied to this COVID moment, they are now and urgent, but what we define as a moment is not just a 2020 moment. It's a big M moment. There's also, and from a lot of your work and writing, obviously, Bryan, certainly it's like, and I'm going to mess up the numbers, but the number of higher ed institutions that are in danger of closing, I think echoes in a lot of ways numbers of like percent of restaurants that are going to be closing. And I see so much advocacy around other sectors of what does it mean not to just stay open as we need to stay open, but to rethink business models, yes, but ways of working together. Like I see different levels of cooperation happening. I see different ways of, if it's restaurants, certainly of food delivery, but of understanding of traditions and of community kitchens and like other practices. And I don't yet see higher ed doing those different practices. I see a lot of, oh my God, it's not working, and maybe there's going to be mergers and things like that. But I don't see that the intricacy and creativity yet of this moment necessarily. And that's also about a government response with higher education. I think there's like been government SOS responses of, oh my God, all of these businesses are going to close. And what does it mean and how do we intervene in that? But if higher ed, and higher ed is certainly can be looked at as a business, if we look at it as a public good and a need, it then has a need to be nurtured and cared for in different ways. And so maybe the government responsibility for it needs to be different than it's been. What does it mean to support an infrastructure for democracy and health and well-being that itself is going out of business? And when I think about that generational hope and change, it's how do you, like this thing that I think we all, and certainly I would think the three of us on this call and the larger audience of this talk, like believe in the transformational power of higher education to demand, support, nurture democracy and to challenge democracy in where and to demand something new. But if that thing is not going to exist as it was, how is there different support for something new? How is there different demands of public support for it? And how are we together taking this moment to abolish and imagine?
to abolish and imagine. That's quite a phrase to conjure with. Thank you, thank you. Your call for government taking a bigger role connects with quite a few discussions we've had with other interviewees. So this may end up being a major theme for us to think of. But building along these lines, Madeline, you had questions about action research and community. Do you want to take a run at those now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. These are also insightful points that you're making, Adam, and I know that the community of listeners really are going to appreciate all of this. So for College Unbound, there's a unique model that has where, yes, like you described, there's this whole student kind of model where faculty and peer relationships are really important, and clearly College Unbound has considered that students are assets. They've come into the college with important lives before they even enter the institution. And so there's this kind of community building and well-being aspect that you've taken into account and trying to provide for students. And so I'm wondering, with COVID-19 and fall preparations, largely, who do you see best involved in thinking about these efforts of community building and student well-being, especially if there won't be perhaps affordances for many in-person gatherings, whether that's true or not? And what might colleges learn from your model with colleges that usually take a top-down approach, instead seeing the student as a center and really valuing student-centered teaching and learning?
That's a great question. And so it's like, so I think it was like March 13th when we like said, all right, everything's online for the rest of the year. Now, College Unbound, a lot of the curriculum already was. And I'll do like my 2-sentence College Unbound like curricular model thing, which is basically like there's 3 layers and 3 ways that students are earning credit within any given semester. There's the Workplace and World Lab that is a full semester. Every semester, student is in this 3-credit seminar with a faculty member and a cohort of peers. They're together every semester, and sort of like this mishmash of what high school homeroom meets undergraduate academic advising meets a doctoral cohort and defense committee. It's like a smush together of like resources and pushing one another and sharing together. Layered on top of that are 8-week intensive classes that are either online or were in person, that are really these toolkits or lenses that students are tackling to move their project forward. And then layer on top of that is sort of competency assessment and students engaging in independent studies, which we call learning in publics or prior learning, where students are documenting things they've done outside or otherwise in life. So the piece of the program that really had to translate into being by distance across the board was that Workplace and World Lab, where students were synchronously and in person up until March 13th, meeting to have sort of the shared seminar with a community of peers and a faculty member. Now, the first weeks we made that transition, we had just as high, if not higher, attendance those times for students taking part in the Workplace and World Lab, because they were looking for that community and connection in this moment of uncertainty. And that was just a like, let's, instead of meeting in person, let's go to Google Meet and get together in that way. Great and cool. I'm happy to like be proud of that. And also, what we really were grappling with for the rest of the year was, what does it mean to think about the pieces that were happening in person in other spaces, not just translating them. It's like, what's the essence of the work we were trying to do? So for 2 examples, one is childcare. Whenever someone was participating in the Workplace World Lab, we were offering childcare, and then all the childcare facilities closed in Rhode Island. So what could and should it mean for us to still have that commitment? In some way, we were thinking about providing childcare so that the parent could be fully present as a learner in that space. So how do we do that and provide that care when someone's in their home with their young kids? And so we were dropping off to their doors, like childcare activity kits, and puzzles, and like a bag of stuff to help a young person feel engaged or have ways that they can work with their siblings or during that time of class. But also, we don't think about it as class or not. It's like just activities and ways that they can work together and be cared for. The other is food. Every time someone was gathering with College Unbound, there was always hot dinner or hot meal. And what does that look like when you're not together in person? And what's the reason of providing food? Is what I was really trying to think about. It's like, was it because someone's hungry? Yes, that's part of it for sure. If you're running around all day with your job and then you're showing up for a class that starts at 5:30, you're not going to be fully present as a learner unless you're able to eat something. It was also about that shared act of breaking bread together. And what does it mean to have something that counts as class or credit, but really have it be that you're sharing a hot meal together and informally talk. And that's a part of what we're crediting. And how do we then have space for that when we're doing it through Zoom? So we were, of course, doing food delivery for folks who are food insecure, getting food for the week, but also for folks in the cohort seminars. What does it mean to deliver hot dinners during those times when you're meeting? But what does it mean to carve out that space in Zoom? So we also were playing with what does it mean to have, like, how can we have cooking classes so that we're dropping off ingredients on a Sunday afternoon and then on Sunday evening having a big lasagna cook-off so that people are able to provide sustenance to their family for the full week. What does it mean to have that cooking class be an engaged, sharing, loving experience? So it's not just how do you eat rushed and then go off to class in this thing that counts as class over there while the rest of your family is eating, but have the food together as an act of being together. So that's the type of care we were trying to think about. And I think across the board, higher ed can and should be doing that. There's absolutely like both amazing research being gathered and amazing interventions on community care and engage with the full student. Greenfield Community College was the first community college to have a food pantry on its campus. I think there's models that certainly I've drawn from and learned from in this work. And I think in this moment of being distant but together, we're trying to figure out how to do it differently. And I know that we're grappling with that as a college. I think it'll look different for perhaps schools that are working to build on-campus communities, schools that are working primarily with parents and older adult learners and doing things virtually from home. Community colleges, though, have been doing this work continuously since their founding. And so they are a lot of my role models in it.
Well, that's a fantastic answer. Madeline, does that address your question sufficiently?
Yeah, I think that you really speak at them to the fact that there's this fiction that we can't compartmentalize our, home and personal life with school. Like you can't just put yourself into these separate boxes in life. That's kind of a fiction. And really speaking to higher education, as you said, as a service to the public good and this fluidity, it's a two-way street where you provide something to an institution, but more so a community, if we think about it in that way. And the same going back the other way. Many ways actually. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question. And also I talked about it as the not extra caregiving, but the things that some colleges aren't doing or doing on the periphery. I think it's the things that everyone has to grapple with also in their classes in ways that they're going to be interacting with students in their homes. It's I've seen some really cruddy postings of faculty saying, we're going to make sure every student has their camera on so I can see them and make eye contact. It's if you're really honoring the full student and trusting the full person in their home, you also have to give them the control of turning off their webcam if they don't want to share what's behind them, or muting themselves if they don't want to share that they have kids running around the kitchen at that time. So what does it mean to respect that you're in someone's home and that it's not college like it was before and you're not just trying to replicate the classroom experience now through Zoom? It has to be different. It should be different in this moment. And there's assets, and that's beautiful to really think about and find ways to engage differently. And also you have to be flexible as an institution and as a faculty and as a peer, certainly in doing that. In faculty training I just did last weekend, I tried to model one activity that I've started to like to do early on in Zoom classrooms is almost like home scavenger hunts. So I asked everyone to spend 10 minutes and go find an object that captures who they are or how they've been navigating this moment for this COVID moment. And so it became like a show and tell where if someone was outside walking on their cell phone at the time, they could pick a flower and talk about trying to get exercise. And if someone like Bryan, they could turn behind them and pull a book from the shelf, right? Or lots of books. And then I had them do a second scavenger hunt 10 minutes later about finding an object that represents who you want to be, who you want to grow into, or the work you're trying to do in the world. And I think it was both of those frames are really important. And then the other kind of secret embedded part of that is there was just 20 minutes where if someone needs to use the bathroom or grab a bite to eat or care for their family in some way or answer the door or make a phone call, like I gave an activity that could have taken 2 minutes and made 20 minutes for it. It could also take 20 minutes, but it's a way to like build in bathroom breaks for someone who is doing activities. I think we have to think in those ways too, where we're not just saying, okay, this is break time. We're just building in flexibility into all that we're doing in the class.
Well, thank you. I'm sure Madeline and I are both now, and all listeners and watchers will be thinking about ways of implementing that scavenger hunt, which is brilliant. Thank you, Madeline, for those deep questions, and Adam for that wide-ranging answer. Our next question has to do with revelation, what the crisis reveals about higher education, and the crises of 2020. And I think to an extent you've already hit on this when you said, for example, that it's revealed that higher education has been deaf to our own ideals, for example. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about what has been exposed, what information, what facts about higher education are now on the table that weren't on the table before?
Less about higher ed than I think calling attention to that, like none of this is an accident, and none of these issues are siloed. Like, of course, while we're dealing with this COVID moment, there's uprisings and demands for racial justice, and of course, there's calls for interventions in climate change, and really trying to think about environmental justice. Like these things are all happening at the same time on purpose. My friend Bernadine used to talk about this intersection of war and warming, and I think that's right. That at the same time these things happen because they are all linked, and you can follow strands between them. Another friend, Jack Chen, is talking beautifully right now about beautifully and scarily about climate justice and crisis, and to think about how deforestation influences what animals are able to live in their homes, and then how that pushes interspecies overlap, which pushes virus, which push like all of these things layer on top of each other at once. And it's a real, it's a reckoning. It's also how do we grapple with being on top of one another and understanding the damage that we have done and caused, and see higher ed as a space for reflection, for organizing, for action, and for demands of justice. And that's outward facing and that's inward facing. I think it's important that higher ed too is called to task for its historical injustices and for current work. And that's certainly College Unbound as well, trying to think about how do we frame, create, support a new institution that doesn't just take practices from before and put them in a new shell. Right? We have a chance in College Unbound to design something new from scratch. And still, in a lot of ways, we're replicating a lot of the things from other higher ed institutions because we're in this peer review process of trying to be like other institutions. And so that's about leadership positions. That's about support for professional development. That's about faculty voice and governance. I think we're doing really interesting work with curricular interventions, and how does that translate to institution building as a whole is something that certainly I and we as an institution are grappling with.
Thank you, thank you. That's quite a revelation, quite a set of revelations. I like that that productive pun about war and warming. You've also anticipated our next question, actually, which was to bring all these together and see how they connect with some of the bigger trends in the world, other bigger trends, thinking about economic inequality or climate change. And I think you've already hit on that. Did you want to say more, or should we keep moving?
So I'm sorry that I jumped question,
That's great. That's
but
great.
they all, but in like the point I was making too, is that all of these things are overlapping, intermingling anyways.
Exactly.
I think it's like, so College Unbound isn't ever trying to build or own a campus. It's trying to build a college that's infinitely flexible and grows and constricts based on student need and demand in place and in person, but in using underused public and semi-public spaces. And so we're not building a campus. It's what does it mean to have a cohort meet in the conference room of the United Way or in the parking lot of the public library? And that, I think, is a response to infrastructure in the world, and that there's so much out there that is not being used, and also certainly flexibility around like the world that climate change is creating and going to create. And what does it mean to not then be locked in place, but to be able to respond to the times in the moment? That's about curricular change, but it's also about infrastructure flexibility. This summer, we were thinking about how, as a college, we respond and engage with COVID moment, and also uprisings and calls for racial justice. We offered free summer classes to everybody. I mean, if you're a current College Unbound student, you're taking free classes, but also if you were a community member, whether you had a bachelor's degree or not, and you wanted to be a part of a community of learners, you were able to take part in College Unbound's learning environment. And sorry, there's some outside noise, so I'll try and speak a little bit louder.
You're good.
You're good? Okay. So, two of those classes we ran and designed in partnership with the Providence Community Library and Providence Public Library System. One was called Your Career in the New Normal, and the other called Contextualizing COVID. So, Your Career in the New Normal, last semester at College Unbound, 86% of our students were full-time employed. And in the fall, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's really going to be about 73% of our students are unemployed or underemployed. And so there's a pretty dramatic shift there that we're trying to think about. How do we as a school respond to that and provide care and support for folks navigating that moment? The other, Contextualizing COVID, was really trying to very purposely link the conversations about racial and health and economic disparities and this COVID moment. Who has access to care and who is on the front lines of either providing care or really expanding that notion of care about food delivery, around transportation service, all these other pieces that folks are on the front lines of, and how that's a part of this larger understanding of this moment and this this scary moment. And both of those classes being taught with the library meant that we were recruiting through the library. So it was like embedded in the neighborhood. Anyone who was trying to go to their public library knew that they couldn't go in the library, but they could check out books. And they also were getting information about how to be a part of a community of learners. And while we didn't meet in person, what we designed is that parking lots of the public libraries throughout Providence were tenting themselves and were Zoom projecting our classes on the walls of the library with socially distant chairs and pizzas that could have been delivered if people wanted to meet in person. Now, we didn't meet in person. Students decided they didn't yet feel ready to do that. But designing that program, one, allowed the librarians, the library staff, the ability to feel safe and in control in curating ways for folks to start to engage in the library, because they didn't know how to do that in COVID yet, and we're still trying to figure it out, and allowed students to be able to dictate what level of comfort they could have being in person or not, using public services or not in this moment. And I think there's a lot of that interesting and powerful partnership building, and engaging with neighborhoods and the assets of neighborhoods that higher ed has to do better than just we're thinking about our campus or behind our walls and the student experience there. So I think that's a lot of the larger picture, and we can pull from that.
Well, that's a fantastic, very detailed example that really grounds this idea of intertwining all of these different issues at once. And I really like that as a change to town-gown relations. But I'm also conscious of time, and I want to make sure that we can address our questions and give you a full chance to respond to them. So now this is the point where we turn our focus from a very broad one to a narrower and narrower one. And we wanted to slice higher ed in a few ways. And one is to ask about the profession of instructional design. And we're asking in part because students in the LDT program, some of them come from instructional design positions, and some of them may go on to become instructional designers, but also because instructional design played such a key role in helping higher education migrate from face-to-face to online this spring. So the question is, what do you think the instructional design profession can contribute to higher ed in this extraordinary time?
Yeah, I mean, you said it as like you're going to get really narrow in a slice, but in some way that's the everything right now. That's the big picture. It's how do we engage together, and how do we form a sense of community in these spaces that I think some people and some students are very comfortable with, and some students are really scared about. And I think it's that bridge that's a really important one to walk. So there's some schools that do kind of amazing asynchronous classes. There's and have been doing them for years. I think there's this moment in higher ed where we're all trying to think about how do we take what was in the classroom in that synchronous, we're all going to be together experience, and translate that to this year ahead, and maybe, and I think very possibly beyond that too. So I think you need to create learning environments, experiences where folks can be okay having their camera off or muting themselves, but still being engaged in class. I think you need to create simultaneous experiences where folks are talking to one another, but also documenting and taking notes and drawing and whiteboarding and all that. I think things like small breakout groups are really deeply important. I think we have to take seriously not just ADA compliance, but real universal design, and really how to center vulnerable populations and folks who may not, even if they are able by the book to engage in these spaces, may not feel comfortable or may feel pushed out of their comfort zone in a way that's not conducive to learning. I think even though we are like always so excited about having synchronous experiences, how do we create modules and buckets and ways for people to engage in class when they might not be able to at the 3 o'clock on a Tuesday time, so that they can still feel a part of a larger learning community, but also may not be able to do it synchronously. But it doesn't and shouldn't have to be an either or, I think is what I'm saying. And so it's like a beautiful muddled mess of possibility. There's other project that and maybe someone watching this can help too. And I think I shared this with some point too, Bryan. It's like Macalester College at one point did a project called Macademia that was about mapping research, and it visualized it in this amazing way where it's sort of like intersecting Venn diagrams of like you click a topic and it centers it, and then it shows who's writing on that topic, and then what are the other topics that's connected to. I think that so I want to do that for College Unbound, where it's like students with all their projects, and you can see how they intersect and oh, I want to do this work. And so, oh, it's linked to this person, this alumni or community member in a different way. I think those kind of tools for not just College Unbound are really powerful. And if we can start to think about other ways that people can see connections, not just through synchronous class experiences, but across the institution and across institutions, I think can only help in this moment.
Well, it sounds like quite a charge for instructional designers, and a very, very good one. Love that concept map of all student projects. Well, we have another question, which again is a slice, but I think you can take this in a pretty, well, numerous directions. We've seen some interesting changes in how Americans respond to science over the past year, past 6 months rather. We've seen with the pandemic, on the one hand, a lot of people embracing or accepting epidemiology and public health measures, and we've seen a lot of people protesting that and resisting it. So it seems that we have a lot of skepticism about the relevance of science. And there's an academic angle that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, since we produce research in different degrees and different forms, what is this year telling us about how we craft our messages of scientific relevance? What does it tell us about how we try to persuade people that this research matters?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I want to disagree with the entire premise of your question, but
Go ahead.
but I mean, I think there's one person who very for political means is presenting a picture of a larger national skepticism of science.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see the opposite, where it's like, even my 86-year-old mother-in-law knows who Dr. Fauci is and follows daily what's going on. It's like, I think there's also this much greater awareness and appreciation and understanding of science. And I wanna celebrate and share and build out of that. I actually think there's not as strong a divide between the humanities as the sciences as maybe traditionally there was, or maybe we've falsely remembered there was. As has always been the case in ethnic studies, talking about eugenics, in women and gender studies, talking about maternal health. These fields have always intersected, and to fight for a more just world, we're always thinking about those intersections. So I think the advice is learn from those fields that have always been doing that well. Also, a colleague, Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, is releasing a book next year called Disordered Cosmos. She's an astrophysicist at the University of New Hampshire, and is also an amazing public scholar on Twitter and in blogs and elsewhere. I'd urge everyone to also read her work, really thinking about both this love of physics, of the night sky, of a questioning and a insistence that we don't call dark matter, and also, always thinking also about the physics of melanin and of skin tone, and of how we see and interact with one another, and what the power of possibility and belief in a world based on science is and can be, and how there's models for a more just world baked into that.
Thank you. Thank you. I really admire your optimism, both in seeing the greater awareness and appreciation of science, and also recognizing that the humanities and sciences have always intersected in all kinds of ways. Well, then let's take this to another technological angle, which is to ask about the digital divide. I mean, you mentioned before this fantastic moment where the local community library was projecting your Zoom classes under a tent in parking lots, which is just marvelous. One of the things that's been revealed for a lot of people is through this crisis is the extent of the digital divide and how powerful it is. And different campuses have responded in different ways. When you think about Bowdoin, for example, giving students iPads with prepaid cell phone connections, or you think of Berea in March, which just shut down because they couldn't go online in a way that they thought would be equitable. What do you think is the role of the digital divide now in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, so I want to call out one other, I think, important example case frame. I mean, um, all college work tied to prisons, I think is either fully shut down or has become correspondence classes because of a digital divide, and that folks who are teachers in those spaces aren't uh, able or allowed to be in those spaces, and students in carceral spaces are locked up 23 out of 24 hours a day in these inhumane conditions, and certainly unsafe in ways that are spreading COVID dangerously among them. And so I think there's like that is the stark digital divide too, and this health divide and access divide. Um, so the classes that we were running inside the ACI in Rhode Island are now all correspondence classes and packets that people send back and forth. So fine. And how great and useful for communication and care and calls for abolition and for rethinking a community of care could happen if we really start to think about engaging seriously in the digital divide, not just as this thing that certain folks have or don't, but also how it ties to a larger world of what folks are not allowed to have, or freedoms that people are not being given right now. For the rest of the College Unbound student body, and I start there because a third of the College Unbound student body is currently incarcerated, and so really engaging or not allowed to engage in our college program because of that. The rest of our College Unbound student body, certainly on March 13th, we got in touch with everyone. We gave everyone who needed a computer. Everyone needed a hotspot. I think the governor here was also doing a lot of hotspot maneuvering. And so there was some like base level that people then had coming out of it. But just because a household has a computer does not mean they have full access to what they need to be full college learners. I mean, a household that has 3 kids and 2 parents and 1 computer is sharing that computer, and the parent is trying to sneak in an hour in the middle of the night to do work or do it on their phone. And so if we're really trying to take seriously, it's this larger thing about access to resources in the home and outside of that. The community libraries throughout the state are trying to be hotspots and expand access to Wi-Fi for the kind of neighborhoods that they're connected to. And I think that's certainly beautiful and great too, as ways to intervene. I mean, it's the same thing of like any of these issues and questions you ask connect to all of them. And so it's this access to technology is also about what does it mean to have access to the larger world that some people have and some are kept out of.
Again, all intertwined, all interconnected. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground in just a very, very short time, it feels like. Madeline, did you have anything that you would like to ask at the end now?
No, this is all wonderful. Taking all of this in, and everyone listening has much to learn from this conversation. So thank you so much, Adam.
Got it. Madeline, I really appreciate having this time to get to know you and your work. I wish you all the best in the program next year. And I hope the weather's not too bad in Hartford tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And likewise.
I hope it's